employees are actually engaged. So myself, I was working a while ago in just a large corporation, and I got pretty disengaged with the work I was doing. So not as much with the work I was doing, but more or less with the way my large corporate I was working for was organized. So, and then I talk about things like typical things like having many rules in place, having no freedom to be like an entrepreneur within the firm, having other people telling you what to do, having no really like a purpose of the work you're doing, or at least of the organization, rather than making profit for the shareholders. And I think many of your viewers will kind of relate with that, because there is a very like a huge disengagement problem in the world. So if you look at statistics, and there are quite a lot of different numbers about disengagement or employee disengagement, but the most negative ones, they predict that there is around, or they measure actually every single year, that there is around only 10% of the people, of our colleagues, that is actually engaged with the work they are doing on a day-to-day basis. So I was in that position. My best friend was also in that position like around 5 years ago. So we decided to quit our job and travel the world searching for companies that at least they claim to have highly engaged employees. We went there and we started to figure out and ask around what they were doing differently. And after visiting more than 100 around the world, we are still doing that. As what you said, we're still researching and visiting all kind of pioneering companies around the globe. We kind of figured out that many of them have a complete different way of organizing. Most of them have departed from our, I would say, outdated ideas of installing like hierarchies of multiple management layers in the firm. They have departed from installing like bureaucracies that lay down many rules and policies and procedures that dictate how people need to work and how to work and with who to work. My particular interest, let's end up with that. My particular interest is on large scale organizing. So not only like, I think we all are familiar with the Spotifys and the smaller IT organizations that do things rather differently. But I'm interested in the bigger firms with like thousands of people that are in industries like manufacturing of healthcare or other kind of industries where you don't necessarily expect people to be pioneering in terms of management and doing business. And I'm studying those firms, and I study in particular the firms that have thousands of people working for them, but have no middle management in place to coordinate the system. Does that make sense? It was a rather long answer.
It's good. We'll go back to what we can learn, but I would like to see how is this new wave of management doing in Romania. I think Cosmin and Sergiu know a bit about this. So Cosmin, do we have such innovative firms?
I think we have a few. The one that I know closest and resembles something like Joost was telling is Autonom Rent-A-Car, the company of the Stefan brothers. And they are emphasizing a lot decentralized teams. So teams that organize themselves quite extensively and take decisions by themselves and have a very agile way of interacting with each other and very flat management for that matter. Besides that, I don't know of any other company. I would guess that there are some more, but it's not a model that is widespread, that's for sure. What I find in working with my clients and also working with students is from time to time a team that works like that. So they find the right mixture between, I mean, the most difficult part in this, and I would be glad if Joost could elaborate on that from his experience. The biggest difficulty in having self-organized team is peer-to-peer accountability. If you nail that right, chances are you'll get it. But that is difficult to nail, right? Especially in Eastern cultures. In Western cultures, it's a bit easier because they are task-oriented. But in Eastern cultures, which are relationship-oriented, peer-to-peer accountability tends to be a very a dragon with 7 heads, if I may say so. So it's not easy to grasp. But from time to time, I find teams that succeed to find the balance and combine this performance-oriented with the relationship-oriented we need in our culture. I'm curious about Sergiu's experience with that.
I agree with you, Cosmin, that the only large organization that we've seen tackling the topic and trying to dig a bit into alternative ways of creating autonomous teams is Autonom. Duh! What a surprise! But actually, I was looking at my experience and having worked a lot in Romania, but having also worked in let's say what we consider Western European organizations, I have not seen, unfortunately, in Western organization what you're saying, a higher level of this. Yeah, maybe there is a higher level of peer-to-peer accountability, but I've seen also a more authoritarian style than the ones that I've seen in companies of similar size in Romania recently. And maybe this is because the society in Romania is less layered, and maybe this is related to perhaps this touching a narrower segment of the population. What I have seen, and this is actually across different geographies, I've seen younger companies that do not have the legacy of 50 years of tradition of wearing a certain type of suit and having a certain type of management. I have seen younger organizations being a lot more versatile into empowering people, into getting teams to act more autonomous. And I have seen across an entire if you have technological sector and the entire startup scene, a lot more openness towards more ad hoc ways of working, driven perhaps also by the more agile approach, broader agile approach to business. With Scrum-based teams initially starting in IT, and then being adopted in a number of different other settings.
But what sorry, Cosmin, go ahead.
It may also be another explanation for this authoritarian preference surprising authoritarian preference in Western organizations. I've seen it also with some expats in Romania. The problem is that lately, more and more teams become more and more diverse culturally. And if you have in a team somebody that works well in a high power distance culture, so they expect authority to be there and be exerted properly, and you have all the way in between, and then you have people coming from low power distance, so they would expect to work freely and be empowered and so on. If you try to balance that, you can't, and there is a huge temptation to find the denominator at the authoritarian extreme, because you think in this way it will solve the fastest and the best, all the mumbling and bumbling and going forth and on and losing time and energy and so on. So I think it's also this tendency, okay, cut the crap, this is how you do it, move on. It's an approach because you think this will somehow put everybody on the right track, which may work or not.
I just realized, and I will serve this comment as an opening for another question for Joost, but I realized when you were talking about authority that I know several companies, some of them technological, that have started like this, and then at some point they had a growth crisis, And what do you do when you grow? Basically, you want some safety. You go to authority. What's the authority? The authority of the system. So it's not the authority of somebody, but it's the authority of the ways everybody does it. So even this kind of organization, at some point when I remember somebody telling me, it started when I couldn't remember the name of everybody. And then I realized I have to put in systems, layers, hierarchy, because he didn't know better. And from let's go for beers, let's align, let's speak, let's make decisions in common, it went into a standard. So could this be an authority that's luring the traditional system and in something that's growing, or in something that is reaching 10,000 people, like you said? And if we can escape this authority, what can we replace the system with?
Can I respond? Like I think I would like to clarify a few points. I think it's not so strange that you cannot find an example in Romania on top of your head. First of all, that's because there is just not many of these organizations on scale in the whole world. There's just a few. I study them, and I cannot find more examples than I can count on my hands. So I can maybe find 6 or 7 that are really truly organizing thousands of people without middle management. And that's directly my next comment. Like if I talk deliberately about no middle management, so that means there is still top management in place. That means there is still some kind of hierarchy in place. Like if we go into the field of authority for my academic world, academic work, I look at these organizations through the lens of what I call organizational problems. And in my opinion, every organization needs to solve 3 fundamental problems. First is the problem of strategy. So like, where is your organization going? The second big problem is the problem of the division of labor. So this big strategy needs to be cut down in little pieces, which people can actually do. Like what we call that mostly task allocation and task division. And the last problem is the problem of the integration of effort, which basically means that you need to coordinate. If everybody's doing a task, thousands of people, you need to coordinate all those individuals together to have an efficient outcome. And if we look at these 3 problems, like strategy, division of labor, and integration of effort, then if I look at these big corporations without middle management, strategy is still very much the authority of top leadership. Like they are the ones deciding where the firm is going. They are like kind of the business architects. They decide about how the structure looks like, how big teams, for example, are, what teams focus on, where what are the guidelines for decision making, what are the rules of the game, let's just say, that everybody needs to adhere to. But the other 2, like the division of labor and integration of effort, is most of the time completely decentralized to small teams, which are connected by very powerful IT platforms. And I think it's this powerful IT platform that is basically replacing the traditional role of middle management, and which enables some of these firms to grow very rapidly, till big scales, which could not happen, let's say 20 years ago, because we simply didn't have this technology in place to make that happen. That's the first thing. The second thing I would like to emphasize is that this way of working, and I think Cosmin already very fairly put the finger on the right point. I think it's like, what about this? You need to have like some kind of peer pressure and peer control and peer authority or peer coordination to make this happen, because you need to have responsible people within your organization. And this makes that some of these organizations actually working for those organizations is not necessarily like a fairy tale story, which is always fun and you can do whatever you want. I think it's actually the opposite. You have to really deliver, and you have to put added value to the customer or to your end customer of your team. If you don't do that, I think you will be faster being forced out of these organizations than being forced out of traditional organization. Because in traditional organizations, we tend to have places where people can hide and places where people have authority over others. Some people don't know what is anymore the added value of that certain individual, because we have a hierarchy and we are used to secrecy and we are used to all kind of other, I would say, outdated principles that maybe worked very well 100 years ago in traditional factory settings, but doesn't really necessarily work effectively anymore in a more like knowledge-driven and digital society we are living in today.
So it's not the much kinder organization that people think.
No, but the people are more engaged in the fact that they have more opportunity to be themselves. They have to have more opportunity to be more entrepreneurial. But that means that most of the time they work relatively hard. Like I think every entrepreneur knows that you are working mostly harder as an entrepreneur than if you're working in a traditional firm. But the people that, if I interview the people working in those organizations, they don't really care about that, because they value so much the freedom and the authority they have over their own life and their working life that they can shape it much better into their daily life. So they don't feel it as a stress factor. They kind of feel it more, or they like encounter it more as like a relief. And the fact that they can control their own life is very valuable for them, which gives them a sense of entrepreneurship, a sense of innovation, but also a sense of responsibility and accountability, because I think you cannot give freedom to people without giving them the same amount of accountability and responsibility.
Joost, can I challenge? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to answer to Radu. If these organizations are kinder, and I think they are. I think also intellectually, but also based on what I've seen in the few cases that I've seen, because we tend, I think wrongly, to associate peer accountability with the fact that peers will be tougher on each other, which is not the case in truly autonomous teams. In truly autonomous teams, accountability means that we keep each other accountable in order for us to help each other. So they are kinder because they can only make it together. There is no boss to go to and say, a boss will fire this one or deal with this one, or they have to do it among themselves. And the best way, the most performing way to do it, it's in the kinder way. It's transparency without judgment. It's transparency in order to understand how can I help the team. It's not transparency in order to understand how can I blame the team. So I would.
Cosmin, I very much agree with that. That there is, I think, a certain first level of kindness to each other, but there needs to be delivery. If you cannot be in
it's also firmness. Yeah. It's also firmness. Yeah.
But this is all
firmness.
Yeah, but this is also the result of, like, if you have a lot of authority in your team, you also pretty much are responsible for hiring new people in your team. So most of the time you're so inclined of making that person being effective in your team or perform well and feel well in your team, because you probably know that this person will perform better. So there's a lot of dynamics people don't really, I think about in the first sense. If they hear terms like self-organization or autonomous teams, people tend to think that this is all kind of anarchy and freedom. But I would say it's rather the opposite. It's very structured and very, what you say, transparent and peer driven.
I wanted to challenge you, because you know the field and you've been studying, and I'm looking at the intellectual complexity of jobs and stuff like that. Intuitively, you would consider that this approach, flatter organizations, would be best fit in areas of, high-level intellectual strategic consulting, where people are well experienced, they know what they know what others don't know, and so on. They work project-based. The dynamic of working on a project is driven primarily by the needs to solve a particular topic and to provide each of the participants their necessary skills into it. Yet, when you start digging, you see that all the large organizations in consulting, whether you talk about the McKinseys of the universe in strategic consulting, or you talk about, you know, the big fours, they keep multiple layers of authority and representation and so on. Why aren't these the first to be challenged by a new way of organizing that is more consistent, if you want, to the way of thinking, of working, of what you would expect of people that are, you know, engaged at the higher level of the Maslow pyramid in terms of aspirations and lifestyles?
I think that's a good, very good and fair question. But I would counter that by asking, do you really think that the leaders of those firms you're speaking about, is their strategy, or is the strategy based, or is their decisions they make at the top, is that based mostly on having their employees engaged, or is that maybe based on other metrics like profitability or shareholder value maximization?
Absolutely, that's the answer. But why isn't there a revolution that starts from the bottom?
No, yeah, okay.
Because it's much more easier in principle, in theory, to create a new entity.
Yeah,
but Sergiu, if more companies will become autonomous, if all companies will become self-driven, autonomous, McKinsey's will be out of business.
Yeah, I agree.
Their
clients are the CEOs.
Yeah, but like that's a good point. But now we're, I think, going to another direction, which is about transformation. And fair enough, I think it's very hard to transform an organization from the bottom if the leadership doesn't believe that they should give up a sense of power to liberate other people within the organization. I can give you maybe a nice other angle for this like question. Like I study in particular a Chinese firm called Haier, and this Chinese firm is like a manufacturer of white goods. There's like 70,000 people working there, mostly in China, and they have like around 10 years ago completely changed their organizational structure. So they changed the 70,000 people, they broke down their hierarchy, and they distributed those people in 4,000 little teams, like that kind of autonomously operate their own little business. Like the team are basically almost like micro enterprises, they call it. So one time I interviewed the CEO, Zhang Rumin, he's called, and I asked him, like, how is it like possible that I have to go all the way to China to find a firm that is doing this kind of way of organizing at scale in manufacturing? I cannot find that in the West. Or maybe there will be one example, which is W.L. Gore from the Gore-Tex clothes, but they're just 15,000 people. And they do it with 70,000 people. And this guy, the CEO, he tells me, that is because your guys in the West, you invented hierarchy, you invented bureaucracy, you're completely ingrained from like childhood and university that this way of organizing is the default way to go. So obviously this kind of new organizations need to start in places like China or Russia, where we view your way of organizing just as a way of organizing, not as the way of organizing. And in the West, we organize, for me as well, when I was a student and a child, I regarded hierarchy and bureaucracy and how we organize as the way to organize. And only after I started Corporate Rebels and I traveled the world and I visited other places, I realized there are many other alternatives of organizing, and even at scale. But there's just like a limited amount of organizations actually doing that.
This answers a bit the transformation, but I wonder if it's not if this is not a question for calmer times, you know, or changing the whole approach. So first, in order to see if we can do something quick, my first and I would like to see also about Romania, but all the companies that you know, how do they cope with this troubles, let's say? Do they cope better if they are organized like this? Because in order for us to perhaps think of copying some of the things, we should know that they are doing it better. So are they more resilient? No, or no, yeah, no. I retract the word resilient because there's a categorization with anti-fragile and stuff. But are they better in dealing with this for everybody? So
yeah, like I would like also to clarify that I don't speak about good or better, right? So it's for me, it's not that I am an advocate that everybody should work without middle management. I think you should ask your people how they want to work, and if that is without middle management, I think you should try to introduce it. If everybody in your organization says no, we want a strong hierarchy and we want other people to tell me what to do, please organize like that. But this conversation with the people never really happens. I think it's also pretty hard to say now if this kind of organization performed better than others, since we are still in the midst of the crisis. But what is interesting, I think, is to see which one of the companies are actually now in times of crisis reverting back to traditional way of organizing, right? That's, I think, the more interesting question to ask. And because even, I think in times of crisis, it's actually the most difficult times to stick to your decentralized thoughts, not to become the top leader that suddenly starts to command and control when there is crisis. And luckily, I haven't seen that till now. I've seen in China that because they are so decentralized, their factories were up and running in much faster than their competitors, because they didn't have to wait till top leadership was telling them that they could operate again, and they need to earn their own profits. So they were running up pretty fast. They were also dealing quite flexible with it. And I know of Buurtzorg in Holland, a healthcare organization, is coping as one of the best organizations with this crisis in terms of delivery of services. And another interesting thing I would say is there's a big debate going on nowadays in Holland about healthcare, because we have a shortage of the mouth protection, mouth gear and goggles and stuff. And what happens is that everybody in Buurtzorg, all the nurses of Buurtzorg are very well protected. But this delivery of protection stuff ought to be organized centrally by the government. But because the decentralized teams of Buurtzorg need to organize all their affairs, many of that teams already ordered their own stuff when they knew this crisis was happening. So now they are kind of getting the blame of taking all the stuff of the other people because they operated way faster. But to counter that argument, we have seen, or I have been to places that organized very progressively for years, but for example, entered the financial crisis back in the days and reverted completely back to traditional ways of organizing. So that happens as well. But I think that is really truly dependent on the behavior of top leadership, and sometimes even the behavior of shareholders. Sometimes shareholders just want to have more control, and shareholders are sometimes just convinced that they need to have a certain illusion, I would say, of control to make sure that the company is managed well.
In terms of, Sergiu, do you want to say something?
I was thinking that look, I've been in different organizations, and right now I'm in an organization that obviously has a middle management like pretty much everybody else, and I still keep thinking, why is that necessary? I have the feeling that it is necessary and it is justified to have it. And I'm thinking, what are the kind of organizations where it is the easiest to make the first steps? And what would be the first steps to be made in a normal, normal, more traditional organization that is still not very hierarchical, where we have a top management, you have a middle management layer, and then everybody else. So not extremely hierarchical. And I'm thinking, that there is perhaps something in the way the labor evolves, with people moving from what is normally called a full-time job, where they're staying for years, into gigs or into providing as individual contributors, facilitated by technology, with hundreds or even thousands of providers, and then a very, very tiny administrative organization that deals with that, and all the rest of it is technology, and all the rest is supply and demand. Would you consider this another model? Because then, frankly, we can count in this kind of model also our, if you want, to performance.
Yeah,
where there are, you know, thousands of people doing marketing gigs, and for a number of, I don't know, hundreds of clients, all intermediated by technology.
Yeah, I have looked, or I look also on those organizations, and there's, I think, a big difference between having like truly organizing inside the firm and organizing outside the firm. Because if you would look at, for example, Wikipedia or other kind of open source software development platforms, they're also organizing thousands of people without a middle management. They have also some kind of roles, and they have some, I think, some back-end support people. But in general, people join that organization. They put something on Wikipedia, for example. You work on an article, and you leave again. But those people are not really truly, I think, employed by the organization. Otherwise, you can also look in like a Uber and that kind of, I think, organizations. But I'm not completely convinced that that gig working environment is very, in the end, very advantageous for the people that do their job. If you look at Uber, I'm not so sure if the people that drive taxis are very happy with how that is necessarily organized. So I am a little bit turned away from that kind of, that field. I think that is really the network organization and much more the platform, Silicon Valley style market oriented organization. I'm much more interested in the one that is much more building like a community kind of sense inside the organization. So why, for example, in Buurtzorg, why if you can run your own little healthcare team, why do you still want to be part of Buurtzorg? Why don't you just start your own organization? If all your work basically is being an entrepreneur, why you still want to be part of that organization? And I think there's clear answers on skill, because what these companies do is, I think they manage to take advantage of the economy of skill that normally, by technology, what normally traditional organizations would do by installing a middle management and installing clear hierarchy and bureaucracy. These organizations have not completely, so they get rid of the person that is doing middle management, but they don't get rid of the middle management role, right? That role still needs to be performed. The role of coordination, the role of control, the role of reward distribution, the role of dividing tasks, the role of getting clients, the role of HR. All these roles are still very much present in those firms. Only they are mostly being done by the teams itself or by like a very small agile headquarter, like a back-end support headquarter. Like Buurtzorg still have 50 people, so they have 1,000 self-managing teams, but they still have 50 people in a headquarter performing some kind of high-level legal activities, high-level HR activities, high-level, for example, administration things with the government, which they don't want to bother all the teams with. So the teams can kind of outsource that to the headquarter. But it's much more a relation of a serving relation by the headquarters. Well, I think many traditional firms are used to not being of service to their frontline employees, but more of being the ones telling frontline employees what to do. And this kind of service relation is something very present in those firms. You cannot really force other people to do something. You have to kind of request that. And if nobody wants to do it, it will basically not happen. Which is different than many people are used to, I think, especially leaders.
I think Cosmin, because he's been consulting companies and leaders, but also teams. So he knows the pulse for many years in Romania, and not only. But I was wondering about Romania because I can see now what we are talking about as the difference between an army structure and the commune structure, and we have here a history, a recent history, well, almost recent history, where having things in common and organizing people to work together towards a certain goal didn't work so well during the communist system, and perhaps we overdeveloped some reflexes, as in it's somebody else's fault, or I need to know exactly what to do from somebody and I don't care, or I don't know how to say this in English, but we developed a way of saying actions with verbs that don't identify a person, but something has broken. Nobody broke that, you know, it's broken. So this kind of going back to your peer-to-peer accountability, Cosmin, how can we fit this? If we agree that it's more versatile, it's able to scale faster. I will ask Sergiu about scaling down at some point, if they scale down faster during crisis. But how do this type of working together go along with the Romanian culture, Romanian post-communist culture?
I think the Romanian culture is the same, pre-communist, during communist and post-communist. So yeah, the different systems just exhibit different parts of our culture more vividly, but the culture is there. And I think I'm with Joost a little bit here, saying that, yeah, as an idea, it sounds great to have autonomous teams. For leaders, especially if you have autonomous teams that do what you tell them to do. But the reality is a bit different. And not everybody wants to be autonomous. Not everybody feels good and productive by being autonomous. So whoever wants to go that way, and maybe Joost can tell us also something about how you become such a company, because there may be many ways in which once a company, not a huge one, but a smaller one, decides to go that way. How do you do it? Do you do it? You start small, you start with everybody at once. Obviously, you have to start by talking to people and understanding how they are, how they feel, and how they think it could be better for them. And then this item of peer-to-peer accountability, I think it needs a lot of conversation and training and patience. I think it will take several months, maybe even more, to find the balance in a team between tasks and relationship. I'm talking about Romania. Because for Western culture, which are goal-oriented, sometimes relationship is necessary, sometimes it's not. But for Romanian culture, where relationship is crucial, sometimes a goal is necessary, sometimes a goal is not necessary. So in order to blend that in a productive, in a high-performing way, you need to talk to the people that you have, because you may have in your organization people that are not fully representative from a cultural point of view. They're a bit different than the whole culture. And then you need to understand whom do you have there, which of them do you want to empower to have them as role models and empower the team culture for this time. It's not necessarily the organizational culture, but the team culture. And then how do you exchange best practices and worst practices too among the teams, so that the teams get to self-regulate their behavior and their performance. Because accountability, there is another aspect about accountability. When we think about accountability, usually we think about results-driven accountability or results-based accountability. I keep you accountable for your results. But more important than that, it's behavior-based accountability. And it's more important because usually behavior drives performance up or down. So if you are only accountable for your results and your behavior doesn't matter, the team will not perform or will not perform sustainably. So in order to create in a culture like Romania, behavior accountability, this is tricky because everything is personal, everything is relationship based. So you need to be very open about that. You need to talk about the elephant in the room many times, in many ways, till people get the constructive way of having a dialogue among themselves and reaching a conclusion that they want to live with, and that makes them, as you said, much more engaged than they were before.
I will ask again what Cosmin said. I will ask, I don't know, Joost or Sergiu, whoever wants to say, how do you become that? Do you grow into it? Or and the additional question is, can you do something in the middle? Can you just apply 2 principles out of 5, or have a blended model, or do it 1 month like this and 1 month like this? Or like Raul is asking, by the way, I will have a publicity break just in 1 second. So Raul is asking whether in times of crisis an authoritarian approach is preferable because you benefit from speed and decisive style. And he's asking, how do you perceive nowadays an autonomous organization prepared for facing current situation? So this embedded in my question, how do you become that, and can you be somewhere in the middle? Or
yeah, I first want to respond a little bit on Cosmin's point, because I think everything, Cosmin, you said makes completely sense, and I think it's all of that I can see in the cases I study, and I would even put some numbers to that. Like when you say like some people, or you said I think some people don't want to be working this way, and that's actually exactly true. When we see this organizations being transformed completely, which by the way can take indeed a very long time. Sometimes it takes like 2 years, 3 years, 4 years before there's like a full transformation. Like I would say these companies are never really truly transformed because they keep transforming after. But when they are in some kind of advanced state, can take at least 3 to 4 years. And that indeed needs a lot of training, different way of treating each other, having kind of a mature way of dealing with each other. Only think about things like conflict handling. How do you deal with conflicts if there is not a boss? Like things like that, you need to train, and you need to give tools and mechanisms to people to make that work. And some people don't want that. And we see around like 20% of the people leaving by themselves once this kind of transformations are put in place. So these are people that are mostly in middle management of top leadership positions that have a certain amount of power, that don't want to get rid of that, or they just don't feel this way of working fits their like personality. And that's fine, because they move by themselves to another organization that is more fit to their personality or their wishes. On the other point, if there's a point of crisis, and I think as a top leader you start to behave more in like a command and control way, I would argue that this would not work. Like I think if you in good times, if you trust your people and you believe your people can make the right decisions, why would you not suddenly believe that in terms of crisis? What we do see in this in times of crisis, that this top leadership have very strong personalities, are sometimes being seen as some kind of the godlike figures in the organization. So if they say something or if they propose something, there's very big chances that everybody will follow them. But this is out of expertise and maybe out of like respect, not necessarily out of authority that they make certain decisions. And what you see, for example, here in Buurtzorg, what's happening now in times of crisis is that they formed a little team with a few key people, which they call the crisis team. They meet every week. 2 CEOs or 2 directors of the organizations are inside that team. And they meet every week. They gather all the input from the organization, from the frontline teams. They pick the best solutions, or what they think are the best proposals or solutions, and they communicate that back into the organizations as a kind of advice of how teams can perform better in those times. What I also do see, which is in the end, top leadership is the ultimate authority bearer. So for example, if there is a conflict between two people or two teams that cannot be solved by the people themselves, it will in the end being brought up to the top management. And if the top management needs to make a decision, they will make it. Like for example, hire, they moved to a new organizational structure. The top leadership decided to tell 10,000 people, you have to find a new way, a new job in your organization, 10,000 middle managers. If you don't go back to the front line and find yourself a place into the organization, you will have to leave. So there is for sure a paradox in this behavior.
Can you, how do you,
if I may stick a bit to the question that Raul asked. In the question, there is an assumption embedded, which I would challenge. That autonomous organizations that are organized in autonomous teams don't have speed and decisiveness. And I would challenge that. Actually, I would say that, also thinking of autonom, but not only, I would say that especially in terms of crisis, and especially if it's an organization which is widespread, so it's not only in one place, one team, everybody in the same building. So if it has teams all over the place, these organizations are faster and more decisive because the heat is on the people that they have to take the decision what to do. As Joost said, we have to start production. We don't have to wait for 70 committees at the headquarters to meet the McKinseys and ask them what to do and talk to the party and so on. We, the 10 of us, the 20, the 50, we need to do this to survive or to high perform. And they should be much faster and decisive than authoritarian structures. Authoritarian structures may be faster in decisions, but not in implementation. What you obtain with autonomous teams is that they are faster at both.
But what you also will see is that some teams will not make it, right? So that is what you see in times of crisis, that for sure these organizations will be faster and they are more agile, and I think they are more resilient as well. They show more resilience because they show original solutions to problems, and they are very fast in spreading those solutions through their IT platform to other teams. But you can view it more like a forest, right? With all kind of separate trees. Some of these trees might not survive, but it will not affect much the whole system. The whole system will stay healthy.
But I would still, look at the particular angle of this, that all these organizations are founder-led. So most of them, they are founder-led. So there is a central figure there that has almost all authority and can exert that authority in times of crisis. For instance, as you mentioned, to tell 10,000 people that, by the way, you either go the new way or the highway. And that is so difficult to organize, where there is no such center of power that will, take in times of crisis, self-inflicted crisis or crisis coming from outside, such absolutely decisive measures that will not be contested or will not become the subject of a long debate. And I think that the biggest challenge is if you have a non-founder-led organization where you do not have such a central figure that is absolutely, uniformly respected and seen as the carrier of the philosophy, can you actually transform, or have you seen in practice organizations that are, I don't know, listed or have a longer history and have detached themselves from the founders, invested in other ways that are able to organize themselves in such ways?
Yeah, I think it's a very fair point. First of all, I have never seen any of this organization without top leadership. That's why I deliberately always talk about middle managerless organization and not about bossless organization or managerless organization. There's still very much leadership there. There's no, maybe not manager, but a lot of leadership, and especially a very strong top leadership. You're right about Buurtzorg is very founder-led, hire. He's not, Jean Romine is not the founder, but he has been CEO since '84. So he's a very charismatic, long-standing figure. But there are some other examples that show that you can continue with this way of organizing, even with a different CEO. And the example of that would be W.L. Gore, which I spoke before. This is like the mother company of Gore-Tex. They have like 50,000 people globally. They are organizing without middle management since 1970s, I believe. And they have had all, like a series of different CEOs. It's not anymore the family that is there. And another very interesting example, I think, is a Swedish bank called Handelsbanken, which is 3 layers still. So there's still a very small layer there, but it's a very flat organization, especially interesting for banks, I think, in financial industry. And they have also, they have been transformed in the 1970s by a very interesting figure called Jan Wallander, but they have had like several CEOs after. But every time they have a different CEO, it is indeed the question if that CEO or that person will go on with the same values and the same kind of principles. And in Handelsbanken, they actually already have one time fired one of the CEOs a few years ago because that CEO wanted to introduce more layers inside the organization. So yeah, it's a fair point, but there are a few examples showing that it's possible. But there, on the other hand, also a few examples that show that if you change leadership, they revert back to traditional ways. So I think
could it be that the traditional way is the natural one, and you have to fight or to have, you know, a purposeful effort to become otherwise? And to build on what Sergiu said, could it be that you are only, well, flat or in these new ways of organizing after the rules of the games are set already by the founder or something? And if something big comes, you still need, you know, so you just play within the game, but nobody is allowed actually to change the rules. So is this the natural way? Is the hierarchical way the natural way?
But why would this be the natural way? Like why?
Because if you say it's a scientific.
No, but let me.
Okay, sorry. I thought you were asking. It's a rhetorical call. Sorry. Go on.
Let me ask you something. Like in your group of friends, do you appoint a manager that makes all the decisions? In your family, do you appoint a manager that is having more authority over the others? I think it's
no. It's my wife.
Yeah, but this is natural leadership, right? So there is a natural leadership everywhere. I think that is natural, but to make a person like having like stating clearly you have more authority over the others, I think that is not really natural for human beings. If you look at like at tribes and stuff, there was always a chief, maybe a leader, but it was never really, I think, very much there was probably a lot of layers, naturally hierarchy, but not like an artificial hierarchy.
I just came up with the question when the word reverted back to came into place, and naturally systems revert back to a natural state. That's why. So
yeah, I think because we are like maybe because of school and because of society, we think this is the natural way of organizing. I don't know, right? I also like I studied like mostly organizational design, not much the philosophical like reasons why we do that. But it's a very interesting point, and I also I think it's one of the main reasons why I think still many organizations are traditional, because other people are doing that and other organizations are doing that. And to be fair, you can also be very successful by having hierarchy and bureaucracy. Look at companies like Apple and Google, and I think they have many layers of managers and bureaucracy. So you can be very successful. It's only, you should only, I think, ask yourself the question, what is the goal of my organization? Do I want to be very successful in terms of profit and technology and innovation, or do I want to be successful also in the well-being of my employees, or the people that actually are the organization?
I don't think this could be a sustainable main purpose of an organization, the well-being of their, unless the purpose of the organization is the organization, which is kind of circular. But then again, you said something about scaling.
And organizations like academia is organized for the well-being of the participants.
No, they're not. Come on. It's yeah, that's
not officially, not officially said.
Not officially, yeah.
Not officially, but
the espoused thing. But what I was thinking, and I remember Sergiu saying a few talks ago that now it would be a good time to scale down, which is not an easy effort to do. And can we borrow something from how these organizations scale up? And I know Joost has studied natural system and developed a very nice model on how what are the limits of scaling and how things evolve. So you're saying that also these systems can evolve into that, but there are some limits. And Sergiu, do you think this advantage of scaling up faster with technology can be used in the other sense now that perhaps, you know, the crisis?
But I was thinking of this. You know, typically you have a crisis, so you have to fire people. So somebody has to exert the authority and decide you and you're going home. You and you are staying here and work harder. You know, so this is very difficult to imagine. You know, self-firing in a self-organized team. But at the same time, you know, potentially the answer still lies in this central father-like figure that can arbitrate that with a set of rules that will make everything happen. Although I think if you would ask the teams to decide, the natural response to of the team, and actually this is happening even in more structured organization, once there is a level of solidarity, is to collectively accept a pay cut as opposed to, you know, choosing to fire some people while we go through the difficult times. And it's happening in the organizations where I'm part of the structure. But there you have a limitation as to how much that you know, commonly accepted cut can be, because if you don't have rules that allow for Kurzarbeit, for flexible timing, where everybody would contribute you know, an amount of time and would still be employed, although with less work and with less revenue, and that is in the legal model not allowed, then it would be very difficult to make it happen.
I forgot about the publicity break. It's not actually a publicity break, although I would encourage very much advertisers to I don't know, can we do this? No, I'm joking. The publicity break was about telling our nice audience, our friends who are watching, that they can use the Q&A button on the bottom of the, you know, in the bar there, to put to ask questions, basically, to, well, these guys. So that was the publicity break. What can we, if there's one thing that a company can borrow, not forever, but for the crisis, from this, what would that be? From this kind of, so I don't want to go through the whole process. It's 4 years, come on, and I'm not a father figure, and my people are not really sure they want this. I understand it means working harder. I don't think so, but there are some perks. Can I borrow one? You know, easily implemented.
I should not do it. I think if you go in this direction, your first belief should be that people can be responsible, that people are good, that you not, like, I think there's a complete different way of these leaders that the leaders, or especially the founders that found this kind of organizations, they have a certain mindset that they believe that people are born as good persons and not as people that need to be controlled and be commanded. So I think effectively, if you want to have such an organization and you want to be that leader of that organization, the first thing you need to do is to have that mindset. If you don't have that mindset, and we have seen that happening here in Holland a lot, there's a lot of healthcare organizations that have tried to copy Herzog's approach without understanding the philosophy that is making this a success. So they introduce the mechanisms, they try to introduce part of the structure, but they don't introduce the philosophy that's behind it. Then it's doomed to fail, because the people still, the leadership still wants to keep a certain power. They still want to step in when they see things go wrong. And in my opinion, most of the time, then it breaks apart. It's not genuine.
I see a halfway to, okay, then it's maybe in my view, but I'm not a purist, not at all. On the contrary, and the way I see it with servant leadership. And because if you have organizations that still keep a hierarchy, but if you're on the org chart is the other way around, where layers of management are there to support activities of the team as such, and they are consciously assuming the role of servant leadership at each level, then you are there with, if you want, the middle managers being more facilitators of work done by a particular team. And think of that facilitator role as, you know, a Scrum Master would do for a Scrum team, as opposed to a manager in the 20th century meaning of a manager would organize the activity of a team. So there is, I think, a sort of halfway that keeps the the facilitating role of distributing tasks and still being able to manage overall a bit of a flatter hierarchical structure, if that is purposefully organized with managers as facilitators and not as rulers.
Definitely, but I do agree with you, Sergiu, on that. Like that, this would be then for sure like a more radical form to first go into this inverse pyramid, or having maybe only a part of the organization be organized like that. And I think we see that happening in many organizations nowadays, where the IT department is like organized as you just described, while the rest of the organization is not. Just look at, for example, Spotify. Many people think Spotify is organized in the Spotify model, but it's actually only the IT department that works within Spotify this way, which is like only 1/3 of the organization. The other 2/3 of the organization is just working very traditional. So I think it's for sure it's possible, and or I think it's a good step. If you don't want to go all the way radical, then this might be a first step to more human ways of organizing.
I think there is an opportunity with this crisis, actually a big one for many organizations. The organizations that are hierarchically run are run like this because leaders think that they can get the best results through command and control, especially control. So they have this fear that if they don't control people, they will not deliver. And pandemic made it in a way that you could not control people anymore. So for 2 months, controlling people became, I imagine some of the leaders went into really deep depression, precisely not because of the lockdown, but precisely because of that. They could not control people anymore. And it ceased to feed these animals. They could not feed this animal that was eating them and their subordinates as well. So if you passed over that valley as a leader, as a previously control-driven leader, you might come to the conclusion after 2 months that people were doing okay. They were delivering, they were performing from their own homes, where you could not control them. So one thing to do that you may do is to ask the teams, how do you think we could work better from now on? Because they saw the control stage before. They knew how they were performing there. They went through this less or no control period as well. They also performed. So now they are informed, they are educated enough to say, how does a better option than both looks like? And then work with that. Because I think teams now have a much better self-awareness than they had before, how they are behaving without control, how they are performing without control, without that level of control at least. And they will be able to say, look, we think the best way from now on would be this. And then try to find a new level. Maybe it's not self-autonomous teams completely, but there is a better way than fully controlled teams. We have questions, Radu.
Yeah, I saw them. I was waiting to propose them. So let's deal with the questions first, and then I just had an epiphany of everything basically, and the answer is 42. But I will go to the question by Mihail. Isn't management or leadership influenced by cultural factors? So he says, personally, I have seen global organizations with various management styles in different geographies. So is this a function of culture? What do you think?
I think it even goes further. I think Cosmin already touched upon that. It's like culture of teams. It's not culture of organization. And there's a pretty nice research being done that shows that that you're actually much more influenced by the culture of the team than the culture of your organization. But still, I think globally, if we look at organizational design, that is still, if you look at global companies, it's often set from one place, headquarters, and is distributed throughout the whole organization. And obviously it depends on how decentralized your organization is, but how people deal within that structure might completely different within every culture. I think that's completely true. Yeah. But maybe Cosmin can, you know more about that.
No, I think it's a very complete answer, and I wouldn't add anything else.
So then Mihai asks, I'll ask the second part of the question, which is very clear. The first one is very clear, but it's just building context. So in these uncertain and challenging times, are people more scared and just follow the leaders out of fear, or because they trust the leader? So is it like a pampering of uncertainty?
Again, there is an assumption in the question that people follow the leader. And I don't know. I don't know. I'm not working in a big organization, but you know, now with everybody working from home, I think following the leader, it's a very, very different. Takes a very different form. Building on what you said earlier, usually responsibility works much better in closer range than in higher range. So we tend to be more responsible to people that are close to us than to people that are further away on the leadership hierarchy. So I don't know how this changed, but I would say that it changed from following or not following leaders of organizations to following or not following leaders of the team, because now teams needed leaders to be much more careful with their empathy level, because working from home, from some people it's a bless, but for some people it's a nightmare. And I would guess in Romania for more it's a nightmare than a bliss. So if you are not taking that into, when you come in the office, we are all the same, or it's easier to pretend we are all the same. We share the same space, the same air, the same food sometimes, the same water coolers and so on. So, but when we work from home, we enter our meetings and projects and tasks with all our differences, with everybody that we have around us, with all the difficulties we have around us. So leaders need to be much more sensitive than they would be in the office. So I think the followership went more to the team leaders than to the company leaders.
But I think it's also a dynamic, right? Like, I think it's true that many of this, if I look from the angle of, for example, Buurtzorg and Higher, like all these teams, I think they have leaders, strong leaders. And for sure they are, I think they are now trying to solve the situation within their team, and they will all look for guidance to top leadership. But top leadership in their part will look for guidance to their teams. So it's like a dynamic between the two. So the top leadership is very much inquiring, like what I said, every week they're inquiring the best solutions coming from the bottom. And the only function they have, I think, is to distribute that good decisions that comes from one place. They want to distribute that as fast as possible throughout the network. So you can see it more as a network where different leaders have, there's like building blocks with a leader, but all these building blocks need to be fed with information and coordination efforts. And this is more or less the classic, I really agree with Cosmin, the classic leadership follower like image that many of us has. I think it doesn't really play a role there. It's much more the servant leader that Sergiu was talking about.
I'll ask another question from Alex.
Can I? There is a first part of that question that puzzled me actually, and it's about, you know, how would junior leaders perform in the current situation? Would the whole COVID situation be detrimental to the revolution, or would they be helped to jump ahead in their career? And while this is not directly related to the self-organized teams topic, I think it's quite a fair point, because one of the things that you get when you work in the office is the better possibility to be together with a mentor, with a master, and peek over their shoulder on how they are doing things, which is a faster way to learn that people do not see. Now, in turn, the peeking over the subordinate shoulder to see what they are doing, which is the typical micromanagement thing, that has disappeared, and that's a good thing. But the other part, the learning part, perhaps is slower now, and it's less helping of the juniors to progress in their careers fast.
Do you know there's a very interesting research lately coming out on this kind of junior and senior managers that have shown actually that junior managers are more successful in their projects than senior managers. And this was obviously very curious, right? Because you would expect that senior managers with more experience and expertise would be more successful. But they found out that actually it was junior managers, because people in the team were more willing to speak up to their junior managers, and they were more willing to engage in conflict through their junior managers than to their senior managers. And in that sense, there was more like diversity of thought within those projects, and that's why the projects were more successful.
No surprise there. Absolutely no surprise.
Yeah, but I find it. I find it really cool, or I find it. It's indeed no surprise, maybe for you, but if it's like shown in academic research, I think it's kind of nicely done, I think.
So is this a power struggle? Because if you take away, you know, not power and not authority, but politics basically, and well, self-worth, perhaps that's something that
the word is status, Radu.
Yeah,
the word is status.
Okay, so Alex's question is if organization would have the magic power of going back in time, how would they proactively prepare their organizations if leader would have that magical wand to face current challenges? How would you, if you are a leader that knows what's going to happen in 2020, what would you do in 2019, let's say, or in 2015?
Hibernate for 4 years.
With everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cryogenics.
I think this is a better variant of what I said before, of what to learn out of this crisis. One way I propose to other teams how to do it better, but I think this is better what Alexandru is saying. Why not asking the team, how will you prepare better for the next one?
Yeah.
Because let's assume September is the next one. What do we need to do as from tomorrow? So it will be much more assertive and proactive.
Cool. I think we forgot about that question. How do you turn into such an organization? But Adriana is helping us. Can you share what would be the first steps for starting the transformation journey from a traditional organization with 1,500 employees towards a flatter autonomous organization? Thanks.
Yeah, we have quite specific ideas about that. I would never recommend to go like full scale directly into this new organization. We have seen some companies doing that, but that needs really like a convincing leader. That's the paradox. I think you need a convincing leader that tells everybody to organize like this. I would say your first step would be very much get yourself familiar better with this topic, like read more about it, have a core group of people that are truly interested in going this new way, so they're intrinsically motivated to pick up this project. And ideally, these are also top leaders within the organization. Have those persons being themselves very immersed into this, not only in the practice, but also in the theory, like why does it work, how does it work, what are the kind of models we can choose from, what are our other organizations doing. I think that would be your first step, like explore the situation. And not only exploring from paper, but actually going to those organizations and go visit them, have some people from your front line visiting them, have people talking with these people actually organizing like this way, and ask them what are the good things, but also what are the bad things. So once you have established that and you still think this is a good way to go and you're still excited, then I think it's a matter of, at least what we do with clients is we just design a future organization with some key people from the organization. And with key, I don't mean just top people, but the people that are also on the front line, and like a wide range of diverse people within organization. Have this group kind of design a future state organization, which makes sense for you in particular in your current situation, in your environment, in your culture. So don't copy paste a model that is very successful by another company. You can draw a lot of inspiration from it, but don't copy paste it. And then if you have a certain way of where, if you have kind of a global vision of where to go, global structures, mechanisms in place, then start pilot in a small part of the organization, ideally in a piece of the organization that is already decentralized, so that is already operating maybe by itself. And then what we always do is we go to a client and we, the people that need to execute that pilot, we let them vote, all of them, and we ask them just one simple question: do you want to go on this transformation or not? And if less than 80% says yes, we don't even start the transformation, because we really only believe that you can achieve this if you have really truly intrinsic motivated people that want to make this happen. And if you have that group, let that group pilot the new organization, and if it has like kind of new rules of the game, then I think you can slowly spread that new way of working like a virus. So have other teams join if they think they're ready, and you don't need consultants for that. You can just have your own people train other people. Maybe some consultants to like some kind of I think knowledge or connections you don't have yourself. You can maybe use them for that. But I think the best transformations we have seen are not done by consultants, but are rather done by employees themselves that train other employees. And then it takes like 5 years before your virus is like spread within the company. But I think that's the most sustainable way of doing it.
Thank you, Joost. I think that's a very large and detailed view on this journey. Raul asks another very interesting question. Do you get inspiration or model high performance and self-autonomous teams from other areas like sports, army, fire brigades, others? And what are the common characteristics that we use to start the transformation of an organization?
Yeah, the interesting thing, I think, what you said before, like the military model,
army
like,
and community.
Yeah, like the one of the first like organizations that like organized in little teams that that were very highly autonomous and could organize for themselves. It was actually it was kind of invented in the World War II in Africa by the British. Like maybe you know the SAS, the air service. It's called something air service. Like that was invented in North Africa and, by the British, by a British like battalion to fight the army of Rommel, and they were the ones that pioneered small agile teams in the desert. And now if you see how, there's actually a wonderful book called Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal, who wrote about organizing in such a way in their fight against Al-Qaeda, I believe, in Afghanistan. Although still military obviously have a clear chain of command, but it shows that even military, you can have parts of the organization that are highly autonomous and can be completely operated by themselves. But yes, this also needs a lot of training, a lot of coordination, a lot of support from back-end platforms, a lot of intelligence coming from other pieces of the organization. And we find also a lot of inspiration everywhere, also in sports teams. Do you know, for example, the most successful sports team in history is the All Blacks, the New Zealand rugby team. And in the New Zealand rugby team, it's very much all about supportive leadership. So it comes back to Sergiu's point. Like, and they have a rule that the most senior players, most respected players of the team, which are mostly the captains, they always have to sweep the floor of the changing room. And they have a few of those rules. They also have the no asshole rule. So if other players know that you are not an asshole, you can never play on the team because they don't believe that the team will get better with an asshole in their team. So there's a lot of, I think, very interesting things to be learned from things like army, but also from government and also from sports and also from family and even from just natural laws. I think we can learn a lot of that we neglect in our management theories.
We're fast approaching the limit and having a Dutch person and 3 people involved in Dutch schools. I would really like to finish on time.
Me too.
So let's have 1 minute for each. Elena is asking, well, we've touched upon this a bit. I have seen managers who try to let go of their command and control style and become more servant leaders. However, when things go tough, they went back to their command and control mode. How do you think this lack of consistency affects the team? So who wants to pitch in?
I can take the floor, but tricky. It's a lack of trust, I think. I think everything you have done to build up a certain amount of trust and certain, like, I think it's even worse if you do it like that. I think then you should just stick to your own personality. Yeah.
I think it's a slow process to go there and a very fast process to destroy it. So from your perspective, Ovidiu is asking, what would be the greatest challenge for a leader in a crisis situation? Example, the current pandemics. So I would tweak it. What would be the greatest challenge for a leader of such an organization in a crisis situation? Not necessarily.
I think it's the same. The urge to step in, like the urge to. I think even those leaders will have the urge to step in and to, like, they're still like founders of company most of the time they're still very stubborn, many of those leaders. So they have to sit on their hands. And I have heard this many times, telling leaders of these organizations, telling me, most of the time I have to sit on my hands. And I don't know if that's an English expression, but in Dutch, like if you say, I'm sitting on my hands, it means you cannot interfere because you keep your hands like under your bottom.
All right.
So
I have this saying from a Dutch friend of mine and a colleague of mine who says, we need to actively sit on our hands.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah.
Which means asking questions and trying to get the best out of it, but not telling people what to do, because then we're screwed.
This is going to be difficult in 1 minute, but let's try. Horatiu is asking, how do you find the right balance between, it's a structural question, between experimentation at team level and standardization at organizational level in self-organized environments?
I think that is very much what I said before, very dependent on the environment, the business environment and the culture. And I think that's exactly a question you should not ask consultants or experts like me, but this is a question you should ask your people in the organization and have them figure out what is the perfect balance between what needs to be decentralized and what needs to be centralized. And that's also something you can maybe go figure out by visiting other organizations that have already pioneered that before you.
I think the best way to reach that balance is by best and worst practice sharing, because then they will find a way what needs to be standardized and what needs to stay free flow. If you continuously, I would say weekly or at least monthly, learn from each other, and you can tell others what did you standardize and how did it work, and what did you experiment and how did it work.
But
I think Sergiu can know more about that.
No, really, I think it's very difficult to make it very absolute and very pure and very clear all the time. And people still have the power, especially entrepreneurs have the power to change their mind, which is extremely useful from time to time in organizations. And I think also that if you keep an open mind and an open heart and you continue to learn and to be kind, so learning and being kind and having that instilled throughout the organization, yes, you're not going to do it perfectly, but at least you will show everyone that you care, and at least you will show progress because of the learning.
I would not see this, because balance is like this, so experimentation at team level and standardization at the organizational level, but I would do like Joost said, it's a flow. So first you experiment and then you standardize what you have experimented. You don't standardize something else. You don't, that's the opposite of, that's the big leader who's wiser than everybody else, but that's not the point here.
Or what we also sometimes see is that they introduce some kind of a market mechanism. So you can actually see what people are willing to pay for, like to bring the outside market inside the firm. And you can see like what are people actually willing to pay for and what not. So if you, for example, have to pay for HR services, there are certainly not many teams that are willing to pay for that. And there you can see what is actually need to be kind of forced into the organization and what can be done on the decentralized level.
Gentlemen, we are officially late, but then we are Romanians, and Joost has been a bit contaminated by our Romanian-nesses. Joost was about to come to Romania. They launched a very, very interesting book. I really recommend it. It's called, you wouldn't guess, Corporate Rebels. And he was supposed to come to Romania. I guess you postponed it a bit. You will come this fall. So
that I think it's planned end of October.
Yeah. So we will communicate, we and MSM, we will communicate about that if you want. Cosmin, Joost and Sergiu, thank you very much. I would especially like to thank all the team at MSM whom you don't see, but they're actually the fairies who make this happen. It's not magic from us, but it's magic from them. Thank you very much to everybody who bared with us for so long, and well, see you next week, I think. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Ciao.